A couple weeks ago, Jordan Peterson issued a video to Christian churches. And in that video, he urges Christian churches to recognize some of the things that are befalling the young men that are causing them to be in dismay and not be able to order their lives or find a purpose, and calls the church to assist the young men in finding a deeper purpose and serving something greater than themselves.
Now in the West, because of the weight of historical guilt that is upon us, a variant of the sense of original sin in a very real sense, and because of a very real attempt by those possessed by what might be described as unhelpful ideas to weaponize that guilt, our young people face a demoralization that is perhaps unparalleled. This is particularly true of young men.
He's been trying to put his finger on why this has been so appealing to young men. And one of the factors that I think he's missed in his assessment is that YouTube itself is dominated by young men. It's who's on the platform. So if you look at your analytics on any given YouTube channel, you're going to see for the most part, by and large, that it's male dominated. But I do think he's onto something, that society itself, our culture in the West, has really turned against young men, against any sort of aggression, against masculine play, things like that, that are having repercussions amongst the young men.
And it is precisely those young men who are deeply conscientious, capable of guilt and regret, who have come to believe in pain that every deep impulse that moves them out into the world for the adventure of their life, even that impulse drawing them to women, is nothing but the manifestation of a spirit that is essentially satanic in nature.
And Peterson, I think, rightly understands that the Christian church has a great role to play in helping young men tell a better story, live a better story, and experience something far greater than what the world has to offer. I also think that Peterson is right when he says that the Christian church and these young men have a role to play together, that we can be better together than we are apart or separate, that the church needs to be welcoming of young men and accepting of them for who they are in a way that the world has completely neglected and failed at doing. In fact, the world has more so labeled our young men as the problem. So what that leaves, that Jordan Peterson says, is that men are feeling more and more stuck, that they don't feel like they have a path forward, whereas the Christian church has a vision for a path forward that actually could be quite agreeable to young men and utilize the strengths of young men to make not only young men live a better life, but also help churches live a better life and have a better future.
The Christian church is there to remind people, young men included, and perhaps even first and foremost, that they have a woman to find, a garden to walk in, a family to nurture, an ark to build, a land to conquer, a ladder to heaven to build, and the utter terrible catastrophe of life to face stalwartly in truth, devoted to love, and without fear. Invite the young men back. Say, literally, to those young men, you are welcome here. If no one else wants what you have to offer, we do. We want to call you to the highest purpose of your life. We want your time and energy and effort and your will and your goodwill. We want to work with you to make things better, to produce life more abundant for you and for your wife and children and for your community and your country and the world. And we have our problems in the Christian church. We are moribund and sometimes, far too often, corrupt, and sometimes deeply so. We are outdated, as are all institutions with their roots in the dead, but still often wise past. So join us. We'll help fix you up, and you can help fix us up.
And really his plea is for churches to call young men to more, not to less. And that the problem in many churches is that the young men have been called to very little, have been expected of very little, and the men have really backed out. We're really needing to find a place for men to use their giftedness and to use the things that come naturally to them to find a place in the church that makes sense, to put men on mission, to put men out advancing the kingdom and the borders of the kingdom, to be making an impact on the world in a meaningful and vibrant way that the world has failed them at.
Ask more, not less, of those you are inviting. Ask more of them than anyone ever has. Remind them who they are in the deepest sense and help them become that.
And so there's a great reversal that the world has taken a culture and weaponized that against our men, and the church needs to flip-flop that and weaponize our men against the powers of darkness in order to advance the kingdom of light, to engage our men in a better purpose, a better identity, and a better story that makes use of their giftedness, of their natural inclinations in a way that is purposeful, beneficial, beautiful, productive, not only for themselves, but for their wives, for their children, for their families, and for the church itself. So that pretty much sums up what I hear Peterson saying. I'd like to reflect a little bit on the points that he's making. The first is that churches should be welcoming for all the people who God has put in our path. We need to find ways of involving our men that may go beyond kind of a traditional view of worship and the kind of things that we're asking for when it comes to the life of the church. I also think that Peterson is correct in his assessment of the negative impact on the male psyche of weaponizing guilt over being white male people, and how that's left men in the lurch. It's left men looking for answers, and I'm afraid that a lot of young men are going to look for answers in the wrong places. They're going to cope with this dilemma of how do you move forward with the things that drive you in a way that doesn't undermine your very existence. That's the message that our young men have been given, and they need a path forward. The church, I think, can provide that path through self-sacrifice, through cross-bearing, through servant leadership, etc., through the example of Jesus Christ, that as a man, Jesus gave to us to live the kind of life, a kingdom kind of life, that is a life of putting others first. It's a life of service and a life of deep and great meaning, a life that Jesus says is life to the full. And that doesn't mean that you have to check out of being a man at all. That doesn't mean that you've got to check your drives at the door. You got to check the things that the impulses that propel you forward at the door. Yes, some of those things may have to be put in check. Some of those things may have to be examined when they misalign us from the will of God, certainly. But here's what I think that Peterson is probably missing in all of this. I think the thing that Peterson is missing is what makes the good news for men. What is gospel really all about, and what is the draw, the appeal, the effect that the good news has upon men specifically? That God sees you as redeemable, that God sees you as valuable, that you're made in the image of God, that God wants you, God has a place for you at the table, and that God has a means and a mechanism to deal with the guilt, that there is actually a way to jettison that guilt through the sacrifice of Jesus Christ that the world has no way to account for. In the worldly system in the West, if you're a man, you're just guilty by association. You're guilty because you're part of the patriarchy and you've benefited from the patriarchy whether you like it or not, and there's really nothing you can do about it. You're really doomed, you're damned, you're condemned, completely stuck. And the gospel offers us a path to reconciliation and a path to redeem everything about ourselves in a way that makes us whole, that makes us righteous, holy, and puts us in the correct standing between us and God and us and neighbor in a way that the worldly system of operating has no way to conceive of, that has no path to help young men get from where they are to where they need to be, all the while basically just saying there's no way out for you, just completely rake you over the coals and beat you up for who you are without any way to redeem who you are because you're benefiting from the patriarchal systems of the world, to the detriment of the environment, to the detriment of even your own very self. Christianity gives a path through that to something better that I think Peterson maybe is not quite putting his finger on yet. So he had a lot of good things to say. I agree with a lot of what he had to say. I think the problems that he addresses are real problems. I think that where he's lacking are the actual solutions. He's saying, yes, churches need to welcome men in and put them to work, but why and what does that look like? And what are the actual benefits that come to men participating in the Christian life that the world just doesn't have anything comparable to offer? That's my 2 cents for what it's worth. Hope you check out another video like the ones putting up on the screen. If you haven't subscribed, go ahead and do it now. If the video has been helpful to you, I'd love if you hit the like button and let YouTube know to show this to more people. Take care.